Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today at our Sekuro Knowledge webinar, where we will highlight 6 questions you should be asking your MSSP in order to strengthen your security posture. My name is Nick Flood. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Sekuro, and joining me on the webinar today are Jason Trampewski, Sekuro's Field Chief Technology Officer, and Tony Campbell, Sekuro's Director of Innovation and Research. Gentlemen, please introduce yourselves.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Trampewski, and I'm the Field CTO here at Sekuro. So I'm responsible for the technology strategy, roadmap, and execution. So I ensure that the right technology investments are made to support our customers.
And I'm Tony Campbell. So thanks, Nick. I look after research and innovation, and largely looking at things that are going to affect our clients in the future. So looking into all the new technologies, all the new threats that are coming out, and how we as Sekuro can keep up to date and make sure that we're building services and partnering with the right vendors that are going to help us mitigate those risks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So let me now pass the microphone over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Nick. So our first question is around cutting through the vendor noise. So in my capacity as our field CTO, I have to keep up to date with the huge array of tech vendors and products, all supporting the missing link in the security toolset. So how do we, in terms of our managed services team, I guess, how do we cut through the noise and make technical decisions on who's the best to partner with, Tony?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Jason. But partnering is a really key aspect of our service design. There's literally hundreds of security vendors out there, many of them performing really niche, specific outcomes for customers. So whenever they look at how they're going to organize themselves or what they're going to buy or invest in terms of tools, it's a really difficult selection for them. And we have the same problem whenever it comes to service design. But as a security services provider, our role isn't to partner with all of them. It's to make really good choices on behalf of the customers to make sure we keep the promises we make to our clients as their supplier of security. I always look at it as it's like a jigsaw. Every piece represents how we meet specific client requirements. But like all jigsaws, all the pieces need to interconnect with each other to be able to give you that full, final, picture. So to provide those kind of great security services that we do, we need our product and vendor selections to make sure they do interconnect with all the others that are near them and work well as a single unit. We try and remove as many silos as possible. So we adopt platforms that allow the SOC team to integrate the best outcomes within our defensive ecosystem. And we look for partners that help us either automate, remove, or address routine security tasks that take away the problem of our SOC's daily activities, so that we've got a team of local experts that can really focus in on important aspects of that service delivery, such as threat hunting, that sort of deeper, more intellectual aspect of the service delivery. Context is really vitally important as well for everything that we do. So our focus is on gaining as much context to give advantage to the SOC team as quickly as possible and allow them to focus on threat verification, threat response, and then handling, and on ensuring that we're capable of handling vast quantities of data. This approach led to our selection of CrowdStrike, for example, and their Falcon Complete solution within our MDR Complete model. And that's one example of how we've chosen technology that, we don't necessarily run ourselves, but it's part of our ecosystem.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that, Tony. So are we leading with MDR if possible? Can you elaborate on why that's an important differentiation of our value proposition?
Sure. Look, managed detection and response takes the EDR platform, which is that, endpoint detection and response capability, and wraps around it a fully managed service. Endpoint threats are typically the noisiest within the context of what a SOC does, so we will see more endpoint threats than any other type. But because they're the most mundane threats, the types that, typical endpoint protection systems like CrowdStrike have already invested lots of money in protecting against, and they've already got a service that manages that completely. By partnering with them, that takes away a lot of the noise that our typical SOC team would have to work on. So by removing endpoint threats and handing that over to CrowdStrike to manage with their global team, our team can focus in on things that are much more complex. We can look at applications, we can look at cloud security, we can look at network security, and we can look at the interconnected elements of security within the client environment, and not spend most of our time chasing typical virus outbreaks and things like that, which are handled really well by the CrowdStrike team.
But can you explain a little bit more around our virtual SOC, what that means and how it applies to how we operate?
Of course. So look, it's really interesting. I've been involved in and worked within the context of a number of SOCs over the years. And the traditional SOC model typically uses a tiered approach to how their analysts are oriented within the organizational structure. So they start with tier 1, who are the most junior analysts, and they're really working on the front line customer-facing activities. Tier 2 are more experienced analysts. They've got more engineering capability, and they're there for escalations from those almost service desk tier 1 analysts. And then you've got the tier 3 analysts, which are really the senior response team. They're the guys that, they sometimes do threat hunting, they do some of the incident response elements, and they're typically the ones that are the most skilled analysts within the SOC. But the problem is, in my experience, this leads to all sorts of issues with how team dynamics work. There's a lot of culture of, this isn't my job. When you hand over from tier 1 to tier 2, or vice versa, if there's tickets that are left unread at the tier 1 level, sometimes it's hard to get the tier 2s to step back into that role. And that can work against the objectives of the overall SOC outcomes for their clients, which isn't a good thing. So to fix this, we've adopted a slightly different approach to how our teams are actually structured. We've got small 3-person teams that we call tactical teams aligned to each customer. Each customer has a single tactical team associated with what they do, and they get all the tasks regarding that customer assigned to them. We want that team to self-organize how they deliver the work to their client. But the secret sauce is how we staff each of them. We have 3 levels of seniority in the team, from junior, mid-level, and senior, which sounds a bit like tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. But the difference is the primary objectives of the person above you, if you work in a tactical team, is to mentor you and oversee your training so that they take your job in as short a time as possible. So if you're the most senior person in the team, you actually have a mentor outside of the tactical team who helps you decide what comes next in your career. It's about progression, and it's about ensuring that the people in the team are all empowered to do all the work. Some people even leave these tactical teams, which are quite technically focused, and move into engineering, forensics, incident response, while others move off into completely different career paths, such as into management, consultancy, governance, risk, and compliance. The good thing about this approach is that, let's say, for example, there are 5 outstanding alerts that need to be triaged. All 3 members of that team would be responsible for doing that work. It all doesn't sit on that most junior person to triage those. And if the junior person is busy doing something, all the rest of the work will still be picked up by the others. And there's no, oh, that work's yours, that work's mine. It's self-organizing, and it actually works very, very well. The other aspect of that service model that's slightly different, which happened mainly because we built the service during the height of the pandemic, is that everyone in our SOC works from home. So technically, we've set up what we call a virtual SOC. It's allowed us to hire people from all over the country, all over the world, to be perfectly honest. And it's given our systems the ability to all work, sit within cloud infrastructure. So we had to design everything from the fact that everything would be remote, everything would be away from where the people are. And where it meant we were able to start hiring, right away from both sides of the country. And as soon as we got a person on either side of the country, we were able to cover an extended day. So even in terms of getting coverage up and running quickly, it was very, very fast.
Thanks for that explanation, Tony. That was very well detailed. So in terms of vulnerability scanning, like what makes us different, how we work with organizations, and how an organization might use a tool themselves to identify all the number of CVEs commonly found in a scan. I guess, how do they prioritize that?
Vulnerability management is a really interesting one, and a lot of organizations do it. And, I'm sure a lot of organizations do it really well, but what we focused in on is adding in risk assessment right into the center of that process. So what we sell is risk-based vulnerability management, not just vulnerability assessments. So when it comes to scanning, the thing that differentiates us, and it's the thing that, I guess makes a lot of other organizations see vulnerability management and vulnerability assessment as a chore, is that when we get the plethora of CVEs that are identified, those common vulnerabilities that are discovered with the tool, we use the client's risk framework to assess. It's not just the client framework, it's the risk framework along with our deep understanding of their architectures, their supporting security controls, and all the other aspects of what we've got to understand about their network, so that when we escalate something to them that needs urgent attention, it's not simply based off what the tool says. It's understanding that, that thing is 3 layers down inside a complex network and may be hard to get to from an outside attacker. So it may be that even if it's a really bad vulnerability with a CVE score of 10, a CVSS score of 10, we can deprioritize that because we know that there are a bunch of compensating controls. But it's only by spending the time and getting to really know our customer and understanding what's relevant and important to the customers, what's going to be of high impact if it's attacked, if it's stolen. And by doing that, we actually give the customer much better value. We're able to then send vulnerability notifications direct to, say, their let's say their server team or their network team, and say, these 3 things are really important. These 3 things can wait until the next patch cycle, which may be monthly. And they're not necessarily, as I said, based on what the score was. They're based on a proper risk assessment. That can then go into the client's risk assessment process. It makes it a more usable outcome for the client, which is what's most important.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Next question. So, in terms of MSSPs have been around for a very long time. They all seem to focus on just collecting as much data as possible, try to gain insights into the entire business. Is there a way that organizations are able to keep their costs down in terms of volumes of data going up so quickly? Are there even small organizations today that are outputting as much data that the cost of storage can be a little bit prohibitive?
The age-old issue of data volumes. It's always driving escalating costs. This is one of the biggest problems. A lot of our clients, they come to us and say, we've got this Splunk system, we've got this Microsoft Sentinel system, and we're putting all our logs into it, and suddenly we've gone through the first tier of storage that we bought. We're now through the second tier of ingestion that we're permitted to, and we're now having the third bill is coming in, and it's way more than we ever anticipated. But unfortunately, it's not a straightforward problem to solve. One problem that's been there for many years is that SOCs always attempt to gather all the logs of the enterprise to ensure they don't miss anything that could indicate a threat. But this model doesn't really pay attention to the other security controls and limited data flows that most enterprise architects build into client network or enterprise solutions. So if you're struggling with data volumes, try focusing your SOC collection on things that you have little control over rather than those things that you've already got control over. So for example, if you've got a firewall that allows users to communicate through just a few specific protocols while fully blocking everything else, then there may be some relevance to taking the threat blocked on some of those ports, but really you should focus on gathering as much information on the protocols that do permit traffic to flow. That way you're actually looking in the places where the most threats are likely to be targeting your systems, rather than just the noise of barrage of threats that are actually bouncing off the firewall. That's just one simple example, but there are many examples where positive security controls that block things are not really relevant to the SOC because they're already blocked. What you're really looking for is that behavior or that instance where somebody is actually doing something that is breaking the rules and using your protocols to get beyond that particular control. We also use some technology though within the SOC that allows us to trim down the event stream from collection points, so that we only store what we need, or we only collect what we need and bring it back to our Splunk service. That way we streamline the collection and the storage, and in some cases save our clients up to 60% on their storage requirements. I remember for one client, they were hitting that threshold where they were going to have to pay for a lot more storage, and we managed to get it down to 20% of what they were gathering previously. So they then had that 80% buffer to grow back into as we started to add more log sources and go deeper onto some of the monitoring that we were able to do.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Thanks, Tony. So my last question is going to tie a little bit into the last one. So can you just explain a little bit more how you determine where to look for threats, especially in large organizations where attack vectors are quite complex and it's also spread across a large attack surface too?
It's a really good question, Jason. It's one of those things that, as a defensive organization, the SOC is typically looking at information coming out of systems as they're behaving right now in real time. I'm trying to make sense of that in terms of what could be a long and complex, build up to an attack, and then an attack using multiple tools, maybe using multiple vectors to get there. So the difficulty is always going to be, how do you build logic and behavioral analysis into your SOC model that mimics and is able to respond to the types of attacks that, really sophisticated threat actors might be launching. And the only way to really do that effectively is to use penetration testing in concert with our SOC. So what we really do is use threat modeling and offensive security patterns to dictate how an attacker would get from the outside to the crown jewels that the client might have. If we can do that, then we can model along each attack vector which systems are going to respond in a way that is indicative of that attacker moving through the infrastructure. So we'll be tuning audit production on end systems or even applications to be responsive to particular types of tools, techniques, and tactics coming out of what the attacker is actually doing. By doing that, we accelerate our continual service improvement and building better rules all the time for being able to detect things, because we're using that feedback loop from our offensive security team. So that's a really, really important point. Most important takeaway from that is, wearing the hat of the adversary. You can better understand how your client is going to be attacked. And that allows you to plan better defenses from a SOC point of view, but also give better advice to the client, because the last thing we want to do is, try and build everything up within the SOC itself and then not say to the client, actually, the best thing you could do here is add another firewall, or change the way you're doing monitoring on that particular system, or rewrite your network so that you've got this type of, host in the way that stops something. If we're giving that kind of advice rather than just pure monitoring advice, we're doing our job better.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Appreciate your time and insights and around the 6 questions you should be asking your MSSP to strengthen your security posture. Just going to open it to Q&A. If there are any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or post a message.
So we've got one question that's come in from the audience. So this is for you, Tony, I guess. The question from the customer is, if they were going to take a Sekuro kind of MSSP service, does that mean that their security teams are kind of no longer have access to the tools?
All right, yeah. Look, when we designed the SOC, this was an issue that I've seen many, many times before, and oftentimes clients, while they've got an internal security team, they want to outsource the complexity and the cost of running a 24/7 monitoring service, but they still want to retain some control over being able to, look at the tools, maybe conduct their own investigations. So from the point of inception of design with our SOC, we actually said that we're going to be truly partnering, and the client's team has full access to our Splunk systems, our service management platform, the vulnerability management system. We make custom dashboards for the client based on what they want. We do those in SharePoint using Power BI, and we also allow them to even log in and run their own search queries in Splunk. So we don't stop them from doing that, but if they don't want to do it, then we'll still do everything for them. Does that make sense?
Yep. Hopefully that's answered the question. There's one more, which is, I think, potentially a little bit related, which is if a client decides to kind of bring the SOC capability in-house, does that mean that they have to start again with all of the dashboards and all the reporting that you just mentioned?
So again, this is a problem that plagues the SOC service provision world, and often what will happen is that the SOC provider at the end of a contract, or if they're not, let's say they're not successful in a renewal, they'll come in and they'll take out all the technology that was put in to do the job, and you'll either lose the data or they'll give you a flat copy of all the data. But you can't really do much with that data because all the rules that were used to detect things are all gone. All that context that's been built up over the course of like 1, 2, maybe 3 years has completely gone. When we decided we were going to provide this service, we thought, right, well, how do we mitigate that? And the easiest way is, look, we use Splunk. Most clients will get a one-to-one relationship with Splunk. We don't have a multi-tenanted system. We give them a single Splunk instance, which is a cloud instance. And at the end of the contract, say they're not happy with us, they can just take on that whole Splunk system. All the rules, all the configuration, all the work that we've done inside of the knowledge base, the dashboards, they remain. So the client literally takes it as it is, and then they can choose to give it to another provider if they want to, or they can run it internally. We elected to do that because even if we're disengaging from a client, we don't want them to struggle. We don't want them to end up feeling like they've been left in the lurch. And it's very easy for us to do that because we're not having to unravel other customers from it. So with that one-to-one relationship with Splunk, it's very, very easy to just move it straight on. A lot of clients like that. A lot of them realize that what that forces is us to be measured on the quality of our service outcomes rather than being held over a barrel with regard to data and the service provision. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed. Well, it does to me. Hopefully it does to the person that asked the question. We've got a few minutes left. If there are any further questions from the audience, doesn't look like it from the audience, the attendees that I can see. So based on that, let me thank yourself, JT, Jason, and Tony for your time and your insights. Thank you very much to the attendees for spending 25 minutes with Sekuro. As I said right at the beginning, this will be recorded and we will then seed out the recording to everybody. And of course, if you need any further information, then please visit our website at sekuro.io. So thank you, JT, for driving the slides. Thank you, everybody. I'm now going to end the webinar. Thank you.